Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Dark Fears family. Tonight, we walk together into a place most people avoid, even in daylight. A place of silence, shadows, and restless whispers. Cemeteries. They're meant to be resting grounds, yet for some, they're anything but peaceful. I want you to imagine this. You're walking home late, and the only shortcut is through a cemetery. The iron gates groan as you push them open. The air turns colder, heavier. Somewhere in the darkness, you hear footsteps that don't belong to you. Do you keep walking, or do you run? What if the one following you never lived at all? Tonight's stories will drag you into the darkest corners of graveyards, where graves are not the only things that lie beneath the earth. These are the 10 most disturbing true cemetery horror stories. So dim the lights, keep your headphones on, and if you're new here, join the Dark Fears family by subscribing. Let's descend into the shadows together. My name is Daniel, and this happened nearly 15 years ago when I worked as a night shift security guard at a small cemetery on the outskirts of my hometown. Most people thought the job was easy. Just walk the grounds, make sure no one was trespassing, and wait for the sun to rise. But the truth is, cemeteries aren't quiet. They creak, they hum, they breathe. The wind through the trees carries voices, and the soil shifts like something underneath is trying to escape. One night, around 2:30 a.m., I was doing my usual round when I felt a cold, unnatural breeze sweep across my neck. The air smelled faintly of damp soil and something rotten. I paused, flashlight in hand, and that's when I heard it. My own name whispered from somewhere among the graves. It wasn't an echo. It wasn't my imagination. Someone, or something, was calling me. I whipped the beam of my flashlight across the gravestones, half expecting to catch a prankster hiding among them. But the cemetery was empty. The whisper came again. Daniel. Clearer this time, slithering through the cold air. My stomach sank as the sound seemed to come from a specific direction. A row of old, weathered graves near the north fence. I told myself it had to be a trick of the wind. Still, against my better judgment, I followed the sound. The closer I got, the stronger the feeling became that someone was watching me. My boots crunched on gravel, each step echoing louder than it should have. When I reached the grave, my breath caught in my throat. The headstone was cracked, leaning slightly, and the name engraved on it made my blood run cold. It was my name, Daniel Reeves. I froze in front of that gravestone, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. My flashlight trembled in my hand, the beams shaking as though even the light was afraid to land on that name. Daniel Reeves. That was me. Same spelling, same middle initial. The only difference was the date of death, chiseled into the stone as October 31st, 1994. 10 years earlier. I wasn't born in 1994. I was already a teenager by then. But seeing my own name carved into a grave gave me a sense of doom I can't describe. I crouched to touch the stone, trying to convince myself it was just some strange coincidence. The stone felt unnaturally cold, as if the chill came from beneath, seeping into my skin. Then, from behind me, I heard movement. Slow, dragging footsteps across dead leaves. My flashlight darted around, but there was nothing. Just silence. Until the whisper came again. Louder, closer, and this time, it wasn't just my name. It said, "Come home, Daniel." Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but something rooted me in place. I scanned the graves, the trees, the black iron fence, but the cemetery looked empty. Still, The whisper hung in the air like smoke. I backed away from the grave, trying not to take my eyes off it. But then, I noticed something I hadn't before. The soil at the base of the headstone looked freshly disturbed, darker and looser than the surrounding ground. Like someone had dug there recently, or was about to. I told myself it must have been an animal, but the hole was far too neat. My chest tightened. Suddenly, the dirt shifted, just slightly. But I saw it. The soil rose and fell as though something beneath it was breathing. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over another gravestone. That's when my radio, clipped to my belt, crackled to life with static. Through the distortion, a voice came. Not my supervisor, not anyone from dispatch. A low, raspy voice whispered the same words I'd just heard at the grave. "Come home, Daniel." My hand shot to the radio, gripping it so tight my knuckles whitened. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking. No reply, just static, followed by the faint sound of something scratching. It almost sounded like nails clawing at wood. I wanted to believe it was interference, but deep down, I knew better. The grave, the disturbed earth, the breathing soil. The scratching was coming from inside the coffin. I backed away, sweat dripping down my spine despite the freezing night. Every few seconds, the static voice would return. "Daniel, come home. Daniel." It repeated my name like a chant, as though trying to lure me closer. And I almost did. Something about that voice pulled at me, tugged at a part of me I didn't know existed. My chest grew heavy, my vision blurred, and for a moment I felt like the earth beneath the grave was calling me down, like I belonged there. That's when the scratching grew violent, turning into thuds, like fists pounding from below. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my flashlight. My lungs refused to work properly, and every breath came shallow and panicked. The pounding beneath the soil grew louder, faster, desperate. Then, silence. A silence so heavy it felt alive. Suddenly, the ground caved in slightly, as if something inside had shifted closer to the surface. My flashlight beam caught movement, fingers. Pale, skeletal fingers breaking through the soil, twitching, clawing toward open air. I screamed, something I hadn't done since I was a child, and spun to run. My boots slammed against the gravel path as I sprinted, lungs burning. The cemetery gates felt miles away. Behind me, the radio hissed with static again, louder than before, until the same rasping voice growled, "You're already dead, Daniel." The words froze me mid-stride. I turned my head despite every instinct not to. And there, standing among the graves, was a figure, not fully human, not fully solid. Its face was pale, dirt clinging to its hollow features, its eyes sunken pits that reflected no light. It was staring straight at me. I bolted, but no matter how fast I ran, the sound of footsteps followed. Not the slow, dragging steps from before. These were fast, almost frantic, echoing mine. Every time I turned the corner around a row of graves, I expected the figure to vanish. But it didn't. It stayed just far enough behind me that I could always see it in the beam of my shaking flashlight. It didn't blink. It didn't stumble. It just walked. Walked and gained on me. I burst onto the main path leading to the gates. The iron bars loomed ahead, my salvation. I threw my weight against them, pushing. But the gate wouldn't budge. It was locked. My keys trembled in my hands as I fumbled to unlock it, the clinking sound echoing like a death toll. When I finally looked back, the figure was only a few feet away. Its mouth stretched open, wider than humanly possible, as dirt poured from it like sand in an hourglass. It whispered again. Not from the radio this time, from its mouth. "Come home." I slammed the key into the lock and twisted with all my strength. The gate groaned, metal grinding like an ancient scream. I shoved it open just enough to squeeze through, scraping my arm against the bars in the process. The figure stopped at the threshold, just inches from me. It didn't move forward. It just stood there, head tilting slowly to one side, watching me with those hollow eyes. My instincts told me it couldn't leave the cemetery, that the gates marked some kind of boundary. Relief washed through me, though my body still shook violently. I stumbled back onto the empty road, gasping for breath. Then, as if to mock me, the figure raised one pale, decayed hand and pointed directly at me. Its lips moved silently this time, but I knew the words it was saying. "Come home." The air shifted. The cemetery's silence followed me, stretching into the night like a curse I couldn't escape. And deep inside, I realized something that still haunts me. That grave wasn't just marked with my name. It was waiting for me. I didn't return to work after that night. I quit the job the very next morning, shaking as I handed in my badge and keys. Of course, no one believed my story. They laughed, saying I had too much caffeine, or maybe fell asleep and dreamed it all. But the scratches on my arm from the gate, the dirt still clinging to my uniform, and the static burned radio told me otherwise. For weeks, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale face staring at me. Worse, I heard the whisper, sometimes faint, sometimes so loud it woke me from sleep. "Come home." One night, I woke at 3 a.m. to find dirt on my bed sheets. Small, clumped pieces of damp soil scattered across my blanket. My window was closed. My door was locked. And yet, on my nightstand, sat my old security radio. It hadn't worked in years. But that night, it crackled to life. The radio hissed, louder and louder, until my ears rang. And through the static came that voice, the same grave-soaked rasp that had haunted me in the cemetery. "Daniel, it's time." The sound grew unbearable. I grabbed the radio and hurled it against the wall. It shattered, pieces scattering across the floor. But even then, the whisper didn't stop. It was no longer coming from the radio. It was coming from beneath me, from under the floorboards. I pressed my ear to the wood in horror, and there it was. The same scratching, the same pounding fists I had heard in the grave. Something was clawing from below, reaching for me. That was the last night I slept in that house. I moved across the country, but even now, years later, I still sometimes wake to the smell of soil. And every so often, when I pass a cemetery, I hear it faintly on the wind. "Come home, Daniel." And I know, one day I will. My name is Samuel, and for most of my life, I worked as a cemetery caretaker. It was a quiet, lonely job, but I preferred it that way. I lived in a small house right on the cemetery grounds, just a few yards from the oldest section where the headstones leaned like crooked teeth. My duties were simple: mow the grass, repair broken stones, make sure vandals didn't cause trouble at night. But there was one rule, one warning passed down from the caretaker before me. He told me never to go into the cemetery after midnight, especially near the mausoleum at the far end of the property. He wouldn't say why, only that if I valued my sanity, I'd respect the rule. For years, I obeyed. Until one night, curiosity got the better of me. It was late October, the air sharp with the scent of decaying leaves. A storm had knocked over a tree, crushing a row of graves. I grabbed my lantern and tools to inspect the damage, but when I checked my watch, I realized the time. 12:06 a.m., and I was already inside the cemetery. The storm had passed, but the air was unnaturally still, as though the world itself was holding its breath. My lantern flickered, casting long, twitching shadows across the crooked graves. I told myself I'd just check the damage quickly and return home. But the moment I stepped deeper into the cemetery, a strange sound drifted toward me. It wasn't the wind or an animal. It was humming. A low, melodic hum carried through the fog. The tune was slow, mournful, almost like a lullaby. I froze, my knuckles whitening around the lantern handle. Who the hell would be humming in a cemetery after midnight? The sound grew clearer the closer I walked toward the mausoleum. My heart hammered. I thought maybe some homeless person had taken shelter there. But when I reached the stone steps, I realized the truth. The humming wasn't coming from inside the mausoleum. It was coming from beneath it. And as I stood there, the humming stopped. What followed was far worse. A voice, soft and cracked, whispering through the ground itself. "Samuel, I've been waiting." The lantern trembled in my grip as I stared at the moss-covered mausoleum. I'd worked that cemetery for nearly 20 years, and not once had I ever heard a voice like that. A whisper carried through the stone, soft but deliberate, as though the earth itself spoke my name. I should have turned back right then. But something about the voice pulled me in, like invisible strings tugging me closer. Against my better judgment, I climbed the steps and pressed my ear against the cold, damp door of the mausoleum. At first, there was only silence. Then, scratching. Slow, deliberate, like fingernails dragging across wood. I recoiled, nearly dropping the lantern. The scratching grew faster, angrier, until it echoed through the stone walls. Suddenly, my lantern flickered, the flame sputtering before surging back to life. And in its glow, I saw something impossible. The heavy iron door shifted, not outward, not inward, but from the inside. The lock rattled violently, as though something inside was trying to get out. The iron lock clanged again, harder this time, and then fell silent. My ears rang with the sudden absence of sound. I backed down the steps, my eyes never leaving that trembling door. For a long moment, I convinced myself it was the wind or my imagination. But then, from the other side, came a soft knock. 1, 2, 3. The sound was deliberate, measured, like knuckles tapping wood. My breath hitched. Then, after a pause, came the voice again. "Samuel, let me out." I stumbled back, tripping on the uneven stones and falling hard onto my side. The lantern rolled from my grip, landing nearby but still glowing faintly. My skin prickled with an icy dread that crawled into my bones. I pushed myself up, ready to flee, when I noticed the ground beneath me. The soil wasn't still. It pulsed ever so slightly, as though something beneath was breathing. And when I scrambled to my feet, I saw shapes pressing up against the dirt. Handprints, dozens of them. They weren't coming from the mausoleum. They were coming from the graves around it. Panic surged through me as I grabbed the lantern and staggered backward. All around me, the graves shifted. Fingers, thin, pale, rotted, pushed through the soil, clawing for air. One by one, arms broke free, writhing and twitching. I screamed, the sound swallowed by the fog, and turned to run. But my body locked when I heard the voice again. This time, it didn't come from the mausoleum or the ground. It came from behind me. I spun around. A figure stood at the top of the mausoleum steps, tall, gaunt, draped in decayed funeral clothes. Its face was sunken, hollow-eyed, its jaw slack as if broken. Dirt clung to its body, falling in clumps as it stepped forward. I froze, unable to breathe, as the figure raised a skeletal hand and pointed at me. Its mouth opened unnaturally wide, and the voice that escaped wasn't a whisper anymore. "Stay with us." I ran. My boots pounded the earth, crushing brittle leaves as I sprinted toward the caretaker's house. My lantern swung wildly, throwing fractured beams of light across the graves. Behind me, I could hear the scraping of countless limbs dragging themselves free from the soil. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to move faster. But the fog thickened, twisting the landscape. The path to my house seemed to stretch endlessly, the iron gates impossibly far away. Then I heard it again, humming. That same lullaby I'd first heard, except now it was joined by dozens of voices, all out of tune, all humming together in a dreadful chorus. I turned my head just once, and what I saw nearly made me collapse. A swarm of figures moved through the fog, pale shapes in various stages of decay. Some crawled, some walked, and others floated just above the ground, all of them coming for me. And leading them was the gaunt figure from the mausoleum, humming louder than all the rest. I finally stumbled into my house and slammed the door shut behind me, locking it with trembling hands. My heart pounded as I leaned against the wood, praying I had escaped. But the moment I turned around, my blood ran cold. The lantern's glow revealed something written on the inside of the door. Words etched deep into the wood, carved as though with fingernails. "You belong here." I stumbled back, my breath ragged. Suddenly, every window in the house rattled violently. Knocks echoed against the glass, against the walls, even against the floor beneath my feet. The humming seeped through every surface, vibrating through the house like a swarm of voices pressing inward. Then, from the far corner, I heard a creak. My old rocking chair began to move on its own, slowly swaying back and forth. And sitting in it was the gaunt figure. It grinned, dirt pouring from its cracked lips. "Welcome home, Samuel." I screamed and backed into the kitchen, fumbling for anything I could use as a weapon. My hand landed on an old iron poker by the fireplace. I gripped it tight, though deep down I knew it was useless. The figure rose from the chair, each step creaking the floorboards. Its humming grew louder, and as it did, the voices outside joined in. Dozens, maybe hundreds of them. The house shook under the weight of their song. "Stay," the figure croaked. "Stay with us." I swung the poker wildly, hitting nothing but air. The figure only smiled wider, its hollow eyes glowing faintly in the lantern light. Then it lunged, not at me, but at the lantern. With one swipe, the light went out, plunging the house into suffocating blackness. The humming stopped. Silence smothered everything. Then 100 voices whispered in unison. "Samuel." The darkness was total, but I could feel them. Cold air brushed against my skin, and unseen fingers tugged at my clothes. I swung the poker blindly, screaming, but the voices closed in. Some whispered my name, others hissed in languages I couldn't understand. I stumbled backward until my hand found the cellar door handle. Without thinking, I threw it open and rushed down the stairs, slamming it shut behind me. The cellar was damp, smelling of mold and old wood. My hand scrambled for matches on the shelf, and with shaking fingers, I struck one. The flickering light revealed the truth. The cellar walls weren't made of stone or wood. They were lined with bones, human bones, skulls, ribs, femurs, all fitted together like bricks. And in the center of the room sat an open coffin. Inside was a body. My body. I dropped the match, my scream echoing against the bone-lined walls. The flame burned out before it hit the ground, leaving me in total blackness. but the image of that corpse, my corpse, burned into my mind. The voices filled the cellar, louder than ever. Hands clawed at me from the dark, cold and bony, dragging me toward the coffin. I fought, I thrashed, but there were too many. My back hit the edge of the open box, and I felt myself being forced inside. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the gaunt figure leaning over me, whispering in that same broken voice, "You were always ours." When I woke, it was morning. I was lying in my bed, drenched in sweat. For a moment, I thought it had all been a nightmare. But then I saw it. Dirt on my sheets, and etched into my arm, carved deep like a brand, were 3 words. "You belong here." My name is Lucas, and for years I worked as a night security guard at a small town cemetery. It was an old place, the kind of graveyard where moss clung to every crooked headstone and fog rolled in thick after midnight. The townspeople always whispered about the cemetery being haunted, but I never cared much. To me, it was just a job. Walk the grounds, make sure no kids snuck in, and keep the gates locked. Simple. But the night that changed everything began like any other. I clocked in at 11:30, grabbed my flashlight, and made my first round past the rows of graves. The air was damp and unusually cold, colder than it should have been for late summer. As I reached the far edge of the grounds, I noticed something strange. One of the graves looked freshly dug. That didn't make sense. No funeral had been scheduled for weeks. The dirt was piled unevenly, as if someone had dug it up and left in a hurry. My first thought was grave robbers, though that was rare these days. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone had been in there. I crouched near the grave, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The soil looked damp, as though it had been disturbed only hours earlier. My boots sank slightly when I stepped closer, leaving a clear imprint in the fresh dirt. What unsettled me most was that the headstone bore no name, just a smooth slab of stone, blank and forgotten. I leaned over, shining the beam into the pit. It wasn't deep, no more than 4 feet, but there was something wrong about it. No coffin, no burial shroud, just emptiness. Until I noticed claw marks etched into the walls of the grave. Long, jagged lines, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. My stomach tightened. Grave robbers didn't dig from the inside. I told myself maybe kids were playing a sick prank, but the claw marks were too deep, too frantic, like they were carved by desperation. I straightened up and wiped sweat from my neck despite the chill. The silence was deafening. No crickets, no owls, not even the distant hum of cars. It felt like the entire world had gone still. That's when I heard it. Soft shuffling behind me, just beyond the graves. I spun around, heart hammering in my chest. My flashlight beam cut across the cemetery, slicing through the fog. For a split second, I thought I saw someone standing between 2 headstones. A tall figure, hunched, unmoving. But when I blinked, it was gone. I forced a laugh under my breath, trying to shake the paranoia. "Get it together, Lucas," I whispered. I told myself the grave had rattled me, that my imagination was playing tricks. Still, I couldn't ignore the goosebumps crawling across my skin. I decided to continue my round, circling toward the older section of the cemetery. The graves here dated back to the 1800s, crumbling and cracked, some half swallowed by roots and weeds. The moon slipped behind clouds, and the fog thickened, clinging to my legs as I walked. That's when I noticed it. Wet footprints on the stone path, bare footprints, too large to be a child's, leading away from the direction of the open grave. My throat tightened as I crouched to inspect them. The prints glistened under my flashlight, as if whoever left them had just crawled out of the earth. And they weren't heading out of the cemetery. They were heading deeper inside. I followed the footprints, though every part of me screamed to turn back. The trail wound between rows of forgotten graves, the fog closing in tighter around me. Each step I took echoed too loudly, as if the ground beneath me was hollow. The footprints led to the caretaker's shed, an old wooden structure that hadn't been used in years. Its door hung crooked on rusted hinges, and a single padlock dangled broken from the latch. My flashlight beam caught something smeared on the doorframe, dark streaks that looked too much like dried blood. I hesitated, the silence pressing heavy on my ears. The footprints stopped at the entrance, vanishing into the darkness inside. Slowly, I pushed the door open, its groan cutting through the night like a scream. The air inside was damp, moldy, and suffocating. Then I saw it, deep in the shed, crouched in the corner. A figure, pale and gaunt, its skin stretched thin over bones, its head snapped up, eyes gleaming like wet glass. Dirt clung to its face, packed into its mouth and nails. And when it opened its lips, a low, guttural moan spilled out. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my flashlight. The creature, or whatever it was, shifted, its limbs cracking unnaturally as it rose from the corner. It stood too tall, its back arched, movements jerky like a puppet on tangled strings. Its eyes never left mine as it staggered forward. My throat went dry, but instinct kicked in. I slammed the shed door shut and bolted the rusted latch. I ran back toward the main path, lungs burning, trying to convince myself that I hadn't just seen something claw its way out of a grave. Halfway across the cemetery, I stopped. The fog was thicker now, swallowing the gravestones in every direction. My flashlight flickered, sputtering out for a second before returning with a weak beam. That's when I noticed shapes moving in the fog, shadows shifting between the headstones, circling me. I turned slowly, my chest heaving. They weren't alone. More figures, pale, dirt-streaked, eyes glowing faintly, were stepping out from behind the graves. Their mouths opened in unison, releasing that same low moan that shook the air. I realized then the clawed grave wasn't the only one disturbed. I backed up until I nearly tripped over a headstone. My flashlight shook wildly in my grip as I tried to count them. 5 figures, closing in slowly. Their movements weren't rushed, but deliberate, as if they knew I had nowhere to run. I bolted toward the main gate, heart slamming against my ribs. My boots pounded against the gravel, but the sound of shuffling feet followed me, too many to count. I dared not look back. The gate finally appeared through the fog, but when I reached it, my blood froze. The lock was gone, the chain ripped apart as though by inhuman strength, and the gate itself stood wide open. For a second, relief washed over me. Freedom was right there. But then I noticed the footprints again, fresh, muddy, leading out. The realization struck me like a knife. They weren't confined to the cemetery anymore. Something tugged at my sleeve. I turned, and one of them was right there. Face inches from mine, eyes hollow, mouth yawning wide enough to split its jaw. The stench of earth and rot filled my nose. I screamed and shoved it away, sprinting into the night. I didn't stop running until I reached the small guard shack by the road. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and pressed my back against it, chest heaving. My flashlight flickered again and died, plunging the shack into near darkness. I grabbed the backup lantern on the desk and turned it on. Its weak yellow glow filled the tiny space, but it did nothing to calm me. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows, blurring everything beyond. Then came the scratching. At first faint, like nails dragging along the wooden walls. Then louder, multiplied, hands clawing at every surface. The shack shuddered under the weight of their assault. I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. The lantern flickered, shadows stretching across the walls like skeletal hands reaching for me. The scratching stopped suddenly. Silence returned, heavy and suffocating. My heart raced as I leaned forward, trying to peek through the fogged glass. That's when a pale face slammed against the window, its mouth stretching unnaturally wide in a silent scream. The glass cracked under the pressure of that face. I stumbled back, shouting hoarsely. The window splintered, and a pale hand forced its way through, grasping at the air. I grabbed the chair I'd knocked over and smashed it against the hand, breaking the wood into shards. The creature recoiled, letting out a horrible shriek that echoed into the night. More pounding came from every side, windows rattling violently. The shack groaned, wood splintering as if it were about to collapse. I realized staying inside was suicide. I grabbed the lantern and my keys, then kicked open the door. The fog swallowed me instantly, and the night air was filled with moans. Shapes moved everywhere. Too many to fight, too many to outrun. My only chance was the road leading out of the cemetery. I sprinted blindly, the lantern's light swinging wildly. Behind me, the sounds of pursuit grew louder, dozens of feet dragging through dirt and gravel. I didn't dare look back. My lungs screamed for air, but adrenaline drove me forward. Then I saw headlights. A car was coming down the road. I waved frantically, screaming for help as the car slowed. The driver's face was just visible through the windshield, an old man with wide, startled eyes. He slammed the brakes, tires screeching on wet pavement. I threw myself at the passenger door, yanking it open. "Drive! Please drive!" I screamed. He didn't hesitate. The engine roared, and the car shot forward, gravel spitting behind the tires. Through the back window, I saw them. The pale figures emerging onto the road, their arms reaching, their mouths opening in soundless wails. They didn't chase far. They just stopped at the edge of the cemetery and watched us leave, their hollow eyes gleaming in the car's red taillights. I collapsed into the seat, trembling, unable to breathe properly. The old man glanced at me, his knuckles white on the wheel. "You saw them too, didn't you?" he whispered. My voice cracked. "What the hell are they?" He didn't answer. He just pressed harder on the gas, eyes fixed ahead, as though he already knew. The old man dropped me off at a gas station a few miles away, refusing to linger. I sat there under the harsh fluorescent lights, trying to steady my shaking hands. No one believed me when I reported what happened the next day. Not the police, not even my boss. They told me it was stress, exhaustion, my mind playing tricks. But I know what I saw, and I know they're still out there. I quit that job, left town entirely, and never looked back. Yet, some nights, when I'm driving home late, I see them. Standing at the edges of back roads, pale and still, just watching. It's been years since that night. But the memory never leaves. Every time I close my eyes, I see that empty grave with claw marks reaching upward. Because whatever crawled out that night was never meant to rest. My name is Rachel, and what I'm about to tell you has haunted me for nearly a decade. I used to live in a quiet town where the cemetery sat right on the edge of the woods. People called it peaceful, but to me, it always felt heavy, like the air itself carried sorrow. I avoided it most of the time, until one night when I cut through it on my way home. That was the biggest mistake of my life. It was late, past midnight, and the fog had rolled in thick, swallowing the streets. I didn't have my car that night, so I decided to take the shortcut through the cemetery. At first, it seemed calm. Rows of headstones half hidden under mist, the silence pressing close. But halfway across, I saw her. A woman, standing completely still among the graves. She wore a long, pale dress that rippled in the damp air. Her face was hidden under dark hair, and she didn't move. Didn't even breathe. For a moment, I thought maybe it was someone visiting a grave. Then she turned, and her face wasn't right. Her skin was paper white, stretched too tight across her face, and her mouth seemed carved into a grim line that didn't belong to any living person. Her eyes, God, her eyes, were hollow, not dark, not glowing, just empty sockets that seemed to drink in the fog. I froze. My instincts screamed to run, but my body wouldn't listen. She lifted one arm slowly, impossibly slow, and pointed straight at me. Not at the graves, not at the path, at me. The air grew heavier, colder, like the fog itself thickened with every breath I took. My legs finally obeyed, and I stumbled backward, boots scraping over damp grass. I told myself she was just some lost woman, maybe a trick of the mist. But deep down, I knew. The cemetery felt different now. Hostile, alive. Shadows shifted where no light touched, and the silence grew so loud it hurt my ears. She hadn't moved, but the fog curled closer around her, almost as if it was wrapping her in a shroud. And then I heard it, a whisper. My name, stretched thin and rasping, seeping into my head from every direction at once. The sound of my name whispered again, closer this time. Rachel. It wasn't from her lips. It came from the fog itself, carried on an invisible current that wrapped around me like icy hands. I spun in every direction, but she remained there, unmoving, her arms still raised toward me. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might stop altogether. Then, without warning, she began to glide forward. Not walk, glide. Her feet never touched the ground, yet she drew closer with each second, the mist parting for her like she was part of it. I bolted down the gravel path, my shoes slipping on the wet stones. The fog swallowed everything, trees, headstones, even the path itself. I tried to focus on the faint light of the gate ahead, but the whisper followed me. It wasn't just her voice anymore. Others joined in. Dozens of voices, all murmuring my name, overlapping like a chorus of the dead. My chest burned as I ran harder. But when I looked back, my blood ran cold. She was closer. Too close. I burst off the path, crashing into the older section of the cemetery where headstones leaned at odd angles. My lungs screamed for air, but the whispers never stopped. The woman was behind me. I could feel it, the weight of her stare pressing against my back. I ducked behind a tall stone angel, gripping the cold marble as I tried to catch my breath. The fog here was thicker, swirling in unnatural patterns, almost alive. I held my breath, praying she wouldn't find me. Then I heard footsteps, soft, deliberate, circling the angel statue. My grip tightened, sweat slicking my palms. When I finally dared to peek around the stone, the space was empty. No one there. I turned back and nearly screamed. She was right in front of me, inches away, her face tilted, sockets boring into mine. Her hair hung wet across her shoulders, dripping with something black that pattered against the stone. Her mouth stretched open slowly, impossibly wide, until it split her face. A sound like wind through a crypt escaped her lips. I stumbled backward, tripping over a fallen headstone. The impact rattled my bones, but adrenaline forced me back to my feet. I ran blindly, tearing through the fog, desperate to find the gate. But the cemetery seemed endless, shifting around me with every turn. No matter which way I ran, the graves looked unfamiliar, warped in the mist. I screamed for help, but the fog swallowed my voice whole. Then, faintly, I saw lantern light flickering in the distance. Relief crashed over me. Another person, a way out. I sprinted toward it, waving frantically. The figure holding the lantern lifted it higher, and for a moment, I thought I saw a man, an old gravedigger, his clothes tattered and covered in dirt. But when I drew closer, my heart stopped. His face was gone. Smooth, pale skin stretched across where his features should have been. He tilted his head like a curious animal, lantern swaying. Behind him, more figures began stepping out of the fog, each faceless, each holding faint lights. They surrounded me slowly, their heads all tilting in perfect unison. I froze, surrounded. The faceless figures pressed closer, their pale skin glowing faintly in the lantern light. Their silence was unbearable, worse than screams. Every breath I took echoed too loud, too fragile. Then, in perfect unison, they turned their heads toward the fog behind me. I followed their gaze, trembling. And there she was, the woman. She glided toward us, her mouth still gaping, the black liquid dripping steadily from her lips. The faceless figures lowered their lanterns and stepped aside, creating a path straight to me. My body refused to move, trapped in that awful stare. She drifted closer until the fog around me thickened, curling like smoke, choking my lungs. Her whisper cut through it all, this time clear, sharp, and cold. "You don't belong here." The ground beneath me shifted. I looked down and realized I was standing on a grave. The soil sagged beneath my weight, giving way. My scream tore through the night as I sank knee-deep, then waist-deep, the earth swallowing me alive. The earth clawed at me, pulling me deeper despite my frantic struggle. Cold soil filled my shoes, then pressed against my chest. My arms flailed wildly, grabbing at anything to hold on to. But the faceless figures only watched in silence, their lanterns swaying. The woman loomed over me, her hollow sockets fixed on my face. She leaned forward until her hair brushed my cheeks, her whisper curling into my ear. "Rest." A surge of panic gave me strength, and I clawed at the loose dirt, dragging myself upward. Somehow, my hands found the edge of the grave, and I pulled free with a gasp, collapsing on the wet grass. The figures were gone. So was the woman. The cemetery was still and silent again, as if nothing had happened. My chest heaved, my skin slick with mud and sweat. I staggered to my feet, disoriented, terrified. But the gate finally came into view through the thinning fog. I didn't think, I just ran, not daring to look back. But just before I crossed the threshold, I heard her voice one last time, soft and almost tender. "You'll come back." I burst out of the cemetery gate and onto the empty street, collapsing under the orange glow of a street lamp. My chest burned, my hands shook uncontrollably, and I could barely process what had happened. But the fog didn't stop at the gate. It seeped outward, curling around the lamppost, following me like a living thing. The whispers had faded, but in the corner of my eye, I swore I saw a figure watching from behind the iron bars. The woman stood there, still and silent, her pale dress swaying. I staggered to my feet and ran all the way home. The fog trailed behind me for blocks until finally, at my doorstep, it dissipated. But that wasn't the end. That night, I dreamed of her. I woke up gasping, mud still under my fingernails. The next morning, there was dirt on my sheets, and the faint smell of damp earth clung to the air. It wasn't just a nightmare. she had followed me. The days after were unbearable. Every night I dreamed of the cemetery, of sinking into that grave. I'd wake to find dirt under my nails, sometimes even streaks across my bedroom floor. Friends told me I looked pale, sick, haunted. They weren't wrong. I tried to avoid the cemetery altogether, even moving to another part of town. But it didn't matter. The fog found me. Late at night, I'd look out my window and see it creeping down the street, curling under streetlights, inching toward my home. Sometimes I'd see her silhouette inside it, standing perfectly still. One night, I woke to whispers right beside my bed. My room was full of fog, thick enough to sting my throat. I couldn't move. The woman stood at the foot of my bed, her head tilted, hair dripping onto the floor. She didn't speak, just stared with those hollow sockets. And then, without moving her lips, her voice filled my head. Come back. I left town the next morning, packed my bags, drove until my tank was empty, and never looked back. I thought distance might save me, but no matter where I go, she finds me. Sometimes, in a motel room, I'll wake up choking on fog. Sometimes, on a lonely road, I'll see her standing in the mist by the tree line, waiting. Always waiting. I don't know what she wants, not really. Maybe she wants me to return to that cemetery. Maybe she wants me to lie in that grave and finally rest like she whispered. All I know is this. When you see fog roll in at night, don't ignore it. Don't walk through cemeteries after dark, because once you've seen her, she doesn't let you go. And I know one day, no matter how far I run, she'll take me back. My name is Aaron, and when I was 19, I worked part-time at a funeral home. The building sat beside a cemetery that stretched for acres, and in the basement was an old family crypt that hadn't been opened in decades. Most employees avoided it, whispering about curses and strange noises from within, but I brushed it off as superstition. One evening, the head caretaker, an older man named Mr. Hollis, pulled me aside. His face was pale, his voice sharp. Never go near the crypt after dark, he said. If you hear noises coming from inside, you walk away. You understand me? I laughed, thinking he was messing with me, but his eyes didn't waver. He was dead serious. That night, I had the late shift. After midnight, as I made my rounds, I passed by the crypt. The iron gate creaked in the wind, the stone door marked with carvings so old they'd nearly faded away. And then I froze. From inside came a sound, scraping, slow and deliberate, like nails dragging against stone. I should have walked away, but I didn't. I stepped closer, my flashlight beam trembling as it landed on the crypt's weathered stone surface. The scraping sound grew louder, as if someone or something was trying to claw its way out. My rational brain screamed that it had to be rats or raccoons, but every instinct deep inside told me it was something else. The carvings above the doorway caught my attention. They weren't random etchings. They were symbols, circles crossed with jagged lines, almost like protective wards. I remembered Hollis's warning and suddenly felt a shiver crawl down my spine. Still, curiosity won. I placed my hand against the cold stone door. The moment my palm made contact, the sound stopped. The silence that followed was so complete, it made my ears ring. Then, with a low groan, the stone shifted. Just slightly, but enough to prove it wasn't sealed shut. The stale, rotting air that seeped through made me gag. My flashlight flickered, and in that split second of darkness, I thought I saw a shadow move on the other side of the door. I stumbled back, my chest tightening. The rational part of me screamed to leave, to run back inside and never return. But another part of me, the part that wanted answers, forced me to stay. I crouched, aiming my flashlight at the bottom of the door. That's when I saw it. Long, gray fingertips poking through a narrow crack. They curled against the stone like claws, flexing slowly, scraping dust loose. My throat went dry. I whispered, "What the hell?" before stepping back farther. The fingers retreated, and then came the sound of breathing, wet, guttural, inhuman. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. Suddenly, a sharp voice cut through the fog behind me. "Aaron." I spun around. Hollis stood there, holding a lantern. His face was ghost white, eyes wide with fury. "You opened it, didn't you?" he hissed. Before I could answer, the crypt door rattled violently, as if something inside was throwing itself against it. Hollis dropped his lantern, grabbed me by the arm, and dragged me away with surprising strength for his age. "Run, boy. Don't look back." We sprinted back toward the funeral home, Hollis half dragging me. Behind us, the crypt groaned, its door rattling louder, stone grinding like bones breaking. My flashlight slipped from my hand and was swallowed by the fog, leaving only Hollis's lantern to cut through the darkness. "Stop pulling me," I yelled, yanking my arm free. "What's in there?" He wheeled around, his face twisted with terror. Something that should never have been disturbed. "You fool, you don't touch that place." Before I could speak again, a sound erupted behind us, a deep, animalistic roar that shook the ground beneath my feet. The fog churned, rising like smoke. We reached the funeral home, slamming the door shut. Hollis bolted it and collapsed against the wall, clutching his chest. His voice was a ragged whisper. "My grandfather warned me. The thing in that crypt isn't a spirit. It's older, hungrier. We keep it sealed. That's why the symbols are there." My mouth went dry. "And now?" I asked. His eyes met mine, full of despair. "Now, it knows you." That night, I couldn't sleep. Even from my apartment across town, I swore I heard the distant rumble of stone shifting. I told myself it was just guilt playing tricks on me, but every sound in the dark made me jump. The next evening, I went back to work. Hollis wasn't there. Another staff member told me he'd called in sick. The strange thing was, no one had seen him leave after our encounter. It was like he'd vanished. When midnight rolled around, I felt pulled toward the cemetery. Against all logic, I found myself standing at the iron gate again. The fog was back, thicker than before. I aimed my flashlight toward the crypt. The door was open. Not wide, but enough to reveal a black void inside. The symbols etched into the stone glowed faintly, as if warning me to stay away. And then I saw them. Footprints, large, clawed, leading away from the crypt and into the cemetery grounds. My stomach dropped. Whatever was in there was loose. The clawed tracks wound between headstones, deeper into the cemetery. Against my better judgment, I followed them. My flashlight's beam caught movement, a shadow slipping behind a row of graves. I froze, straining to hear. Then I heard it. Low, labored breathing. Not human. I whispered, "Who's there?" My voice shook. The breathing stopped. Suddenly, something darted past me in the fog. So fast, my light barely caught it. I spun, heart hammering, and for just a moment I saw it. A tall, gaunt figure, its skin stretched tight over bone, gray and rotting. Its eyes glowed faintly yellow, unblinking. The thing crouched on top of a gravestone, its clawed hands flexing. It didn't move toward me. Instead, it grinned. The smile was too wide, jagged teeth glinting in the dark. Then it bolted into the mist, vanishing as if the fog had swallowed it whole. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. Hollis's warning echoed in my head. Now it knows you. I wanted to run. Every part of me screamed to get out, but my legs felt rooted to the ground. I forced myself toward the funeral home, glancing over my shoulder with every step. Inside, I locked the doors, breathing hard. My hands shook as I reached for the landline to call Hollis. No answer. Instead, static hissed faintly through the receiver. Then, slowly, a voice emerged. Not Hollis's, not anyone I knew. A rasping whisper. Aaron. The phone clattered from my hand. My chest tightened as the whisper echoed through the hall, not from the phone, but inside the building. Something was here. The lights flickered, buzzing. In the reflection of a window, I saw movement behind me. I turned, flashlight trembling. Nothing. Then I saw the footprints. Muddy, clawed, trailing across the tiled floor, leading toward the basement. The crypt wasn't holding it anymore. It had followed me home. I crept toward the basement, every instinct screaming not to. But if it was down there, I had to know. I couldn't let it roam free. The basement smelled of damp rot. My flashlight swept across old coffins, shelves of embalming fluid, and rusting tools. At the far end, the footprints stopped at a steel storage door. The door rattled. Something was behind it. I raised a crowbar, my only weapon, and braced myself. Suddenly, the rattling stopped. Silence pressed in. Then, slow, deliberate scratching began, like claws etching symbols into metal. I wanted to back away, but then a voice slithered through the cracks. You opened the door. Now you are mine. The steel buckled inward, screeching as if it would burst. I bolted up the stairs, slamming the door shut behind me. The whole building shook as the thing threw itself against the basement door. The frame cracked, dust raining down. It wouldn't hold long. I didn't think. I just ran. Bursting out of the funeral home, I sprinted through the cemetery, the fog clutching at me. Behind me, the building groaned, windows shattering as something massive broke free. I dove behind a row of headstones, holding my breath. Through the mist, I saw it emerge. Taller than before, its body twisted, bones protruding unnaturally, glowing eyes searching. It sniffed the air, those jagged teeth gleaming. It turned toward me. Suddenly, a flash of light burst across the cemetery. Hollis. He stood by the crypt, lantern blazing, shouting incantations I didn't understand. The creature shrieked, stumbling, its form writhing under the light. Get to me, Hollis screamed. I bolted, heart pounding, as the thing roared and charged after me. Hollis threw a bag of salt across the ground. The creature hit the line and recoiled, shrieking like it was burning. For a moment, I thought we were safe. Hollis grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the crypt. Help me seal it, he shouted. Together, we pushed the stone door closed as the creature clawed and screamed, its massive frame slamming against the barrier. With every shove, I felt my bones shake. Hollis scattered more salt and pressed a charm into my hand. Never take this off, he growled. It'll know you, always. But this will keep it from finding you, the door groaned shut. The symbols burned brightly for a moment, then dimmed. The cemetery fell silent. I collapsed, drenched in sweat, my lungs burning. Hollis looked 10 years older in that instant. You nearly doomed us all, he whispered. I tried to speak, but no words came. The next morning, Hollis was gone again. His lantern sat by the crypt, still warm, but he had vanished without a trace. To this day, I still wear the charm he gave me. But sometimes, when the fog rolls in at night, I swear I hear it calling my name from the other side of the graveyard. My name is Daniel, and for most of my life, I never believed in ghosts. Cemeteries were just places of stone and memory to me, quiet spaces where people visited the past. That changed the summer I agreed to help a friend with night maintenance at a local graveyard. It was supposed to be easy. Cutting grass, trimming weeds, locking the gates. Nothing unusual. But on my very first night, I realized something wasn't right. It started when I passed through the older section of the cemetery, where the stones leaned at odd angles and moss covered the names. The air was heavy there, damp and suffocating, as if it pressed against my skin. My flashlight beam caught nothing unusual at first, just rows of forgotten graves swallowed by weeds. Then I heard it, a voice. At first, I thought someone was whispering nearby, but when I swung my light around, no one was there. The whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, circling me, rising and falling like a chant. I bent closer to the ground, ears straining. The sound wasn't coming from around me. It was coming from beneath the headstones. I stumbled back, heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was the wind. But the words were clear now, distorted yet sharp, like voices pressed against glass. Daniel. Hearing my name in that whisper made the air leave my lungs. I'd never told anyone I'd be here tonight. No one except my friend who got me the job. I knelt by one of the headstones, pressing my ear to the cold stone. The whisper was louder here, desperate, clawing at the edge of comprehension. A woman's voice, trembling. "Help, still here, can't leave." I staggered back, nearly dropping my flashlight. My rational mind scrambled for answers. Maybe there was a hidden speaker, some sick prank. Maybe sound carried strangely in the fog. But when I backed away, the whispers followed. I turned and bolted, flashlight bouncing wildly as I ran across the uneven ground. My boot caught on a root and I crashed hard against a headstone. Pain shot through my shoulder, but worse was the realization. The stone beneath me vibrated, as though something inside was trying to push its way out. I scrambled to my feet, flashlight beam darting over the graves. The whispers rose into a chorus now. Dozens of voices overlapping, some begging, others screaming. It was deafening and made the ground feel alive beneath me. Panicked, I sprinted toward the cemetery gate. But when I reached it, the lock was snapped shut with heavy chains I hadn't put there. My chest tightened. I was trapped. Turning back, I saw the fog thickening, pooling unnaturally around the older graves. From within it, faint figures began to take shape. Elongated shadows writhing and twisting, arms stretching upward like drowning victims. I pressed my back against the gate, gripping my flashlight like a weapon. One figure pulled free from the mist, its body pale and translucent. It looked like a woman in a tattered dress, her mouth stretched impossibly wide. She raised her arm and pointed directly at me. The whispers cut off in an instant. Then, all at once, the headstones began to crack. The first gravestone split down the middle with a thunderous crack, and the ground beneath it heaved like something was crawling up. I backed away, my hands shaking so badly the flashlight beam jerked wildly. From the shattered grave, skeletal hands clawed upward, dirt spilling across the grass. The figure dragged itself free, not flesh and blood, but a rotting corpse, with empty sockets glowing faintly. It turned its skull toward me, jaws opening in a silent scream. Another headstone cracked, and another. The cemetery was waking up. I stumbled backward, slamming into the iron gate. My breath came in ragged gasps, white in the cold air. The voices rose again, but they weren't whispers now. They were screams, shrill and furious, echoing across the graveyard. Then I heard her again, that same woman's voice, piercing through the chaos. Beneath the stone. My beam fell on a massive headstone in the center of the field, larger than the rest, carved with runes I didn't recognize. The earth around it pulsed like a heartbeat. Whatever was happening, that grave was the source. I forced myself toward the central headstone, dodging between graves as skeletal forms dragged themselves free. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, but fast enough to make my skin crawl. As I neared the massive stone, the whispers returned, so loud they vibrated in my skull. My vision blurred, my knees weakening, but I pressed on. The runes carved into the stone pulsed with light, glowing brighter with each step I took. Suddenly, a shape rose directly in front of me. A towering figure cloaked in shadow, its face obscured by a veil of fog. Its voice thundered in my head, deeper than any human's. "You are not welcome here." I staggered back, clutching my ears as blood trickled down from one. My flashlight flickered, then died completely, plunging me into near-total darkness. The figure reached toward me, its hands stretching impossibly far. But just before it touched me, the woman's voice cut through again, sharp and desperate. "Break it. Break the stone." I looked down at the glowing headstone. My only chance was to destroy it. I forced myself toward the central headstone, dodging between graves as skeletal forms dragged themselves free. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, but fast enough to make my skin crawl. As I neared the massive stone, the whispers returned, so loud they vibrated in my skull. My vision blurred, my knees weakening, but I pressed on. The runes carved into the stone pulsed with light, glowing brighter with each step I took. Suddenly, a shape rose directly in front of me. A towering figure cloaked in shadow, its face obscured by a veil of fog. Its voice thundered in my head, deeper than any human's. "You are not welcome here." I staggered back, clutching my ears as blood trickled down from one. My flashlight flickered, then died completely, plunging me into near-total darkness. The figure reached toward me, its hands stretching impossibly far. But just before it touched me, the woman's voice cut through again, sharp and desperate. "Break it. Break the stone." I looked down at the glowing headstone. My only chance was to destroy it. The darkness pressed in on me, crushing and suffocating. My chest tightened as if invisible hands were squeezing the air from my lungs. The shadow towered above me, its face finely visible, a twisted mass of bone and hollow eyes, grinning with endless rows of jagged teeth. "Mine," it whispered, reaching down. I turned and ran, stumbling over graves, lungs burning. The fog thickened until I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. But the whispers returned. Not the shadows, but the woman's again, guiding me. "This way." I followed blindly, my legs carrying me deeper into the cemetery. Through the mist, I saw a small mausoleum, its stone door cracked open. Light flickered inside, warm and golden, unlike anything else in this nightmare. I dove inside, slamming the door behind me. The screams of the shadow battered the stone walls, shaking dust loose, but it didn't break through. Inside, candles flickered along the walls, illuminating faded writing in a language I couldn't read. At the far end was a statue of a woman, her stone eyes closed, and beneath her, a coffin. The whispers grew louder inside the mausoleum, filling my ears until I thought my head would split. I staggered toward the coffin beneath the statue, drawn by a force I couldn't resist. The lid shifted slightly, as though something inside wanted out. My hands moved on their own, prying the stone lid back. Inside lay a skeleton, draped in tattered robes, clutching a book bound in blackened leather. The moment my fingers brushed the book, the statue's eyes snapped open, glowing faintly. The whispers stopped, and her voice filled the chamber. "You have unleashed the Keeper of Shadows. Take the book, or be consumed." Terrified, I grabbed the book. The moment I did, the entire mausoleum shook. The door cracked, and the shadow's claws pierced through, tearing the stone apart. The statue's voice thundered. "Read the words. Seal him again." Pages flipped open on their own, symbols glowing. My lips moved without understanding, chanting words that burned my throat. The shadow shrieked, its massive form spilling through the door. Its hollow eyes locked onto me as the words grew louder, echoing in both our heads. The shadow lunged at me, claws slashing, knocking candles to the ground. Darkness poured into the chamber, smothering the golden glow. I screamed the words the book forced into my mouth, my voice breaking. The statue raised her arms, light bursting from the cracks in her stone form. The shadow recoiled, screaming in rage. My chanting grew louder, faster, burning in my chest. The coffin rattled violently, and the skeleton within crumbled to dust. The book glowed so brightly, it nearly blinded me, the words on the page burning into my mind. The shadow's form split apart, fragments of black mist ripping from its body. It shrieked, thrashing, its jagged teeth snapping inches from my face. With one final roar, the light consumed it, dragging it back into the broken headstone outside. The mausoleum fell silent. The book in my hands turned to ash, crumbling between my fingers. And then, the statue's head tilted down, eyes fading. "You have sealed him. For now." I collapsed onto the cold stone floor, my body shaking, sweat dripping down my face. The mausoleum door was cracked, the fog outside slowly thinning. The voices were gone. The cemetery was silent once more. But the statue's words echoed in my skull. "For now." I staggered to my feet, barely able to walk, and stumbled out of the mausoleum. The graves lay still again, the cracked headstones sealed, as though nothing had happened. The massive central stone was whole once more, its runes faintly glowing like a warning. By the time the sun rose, I was gone. I never returned to that cemetery. Yet some nights, when the air is still and the moonlight is pale, I hear the whispers again. Soft, patient, rising from beneath the ground. They don't beg anymore. They wait. And deep down, I know the shadow is waiting with them. My name is Evelyn, and when I was younger, I worked part-time at a cemetery on the outskirts of town. The grounds were massive, old, and overgrown, with mausoleums so weathered they looked like they had grown out of the earth itself. Most of the staff hated night duty, but I didn't mind. The place was quiet, almost peaceful, or so I thought. One evening, an older gravedigger named Sam warned me with a strange seriousness in his voice. "If you see the caretaker walking the grounds at night, don't speak to him. Don't even look at him. Just walk away." I laughed it off, thinking it was another local ghost story meant to scare the new girl. But that night, as the clock pushed past midnight, I saw him. A tall figure in a long, tattered coat, carrying an old lantern that swayed with a dim yellow glow. He walked slowly among the graves, dragging something behind him that scraped against the gravel path. I froze, staring at him from the distance. Then I remembered Sam's warning. I ducked behind a headstone, my heart hammering in my chest. The figure's lantern flickered, casting long shadows that stretched unnaturally across the graves. He moved slowly, methodically, as if he were checking each grave one by one. The strange dragging sound never stopped. It scraped along the gravel with every step, and in the silence of the cemetery, it felt unbearably loud. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't notice me. Then, for the briefest second, the lantern light revealed his face, or what was left of it. His skin was gray, sagging, almost melting from his bones, and his eyes were hollow pits of shadow. My stomach turned. No living person could look like that. Suddenly, the dragging stopped. The figure raised his head, sniffing the air like an animal searching for prey. I realized, too late, that hiding wasn't enough. He knew I was there. I forced myself not to move, gripping the edges of the gravestone until my nails dug into the stone. My breath trembled in my chest as I watched the caretaker slowly turn in my direction. His lantern light swung, sweeping across the graves. The shadows bent unnaturally, like the light itself warped reality. When the glow passed over my hiding spot, the air grew so cold that frost formed along the edges of the stone. And then, suddenly, he spoke. A low, gravelly whisper crawled out of his mouth. "This is not your place." My blood froze. It wasn't just the words. It was the way he said them. His voice seemed to echo from everywhere at once, vibrating through the ground beneath my feet. I bolted. I didn't care if he saw me. My legs carried me across the cemetery as fast as they could. Behind me, I heard the dragging sound again, faster this time. He was following. I sprinted past crooked graves and decaying statues, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly. Every step I took echoed louder than it should have, like the ground wanted to betray me. The caretaker's lantern glow grew closer, casting an eerie yellow haze over the fog. I tried to reach the main gate, but the fog thickened, twisting the path into unfamiliar turns. I swore I knew this cemetery. I had worked here for weeks, but nothing looked right anymore. The graves seemed to shift, rearranging themselves in the mist. Desperate, I stumbled into a small family plot surrounded by an iron fence. I slammed the gate shut behind me, trying to catch my breath. The dragging sound stopped. Silence pressed in. When I dared to look up, the caretaker stood just outside the fence. His lantern hung low, illuminating his face. His lips stretched into a grotesque grin. Slowly, he raised his free hand and pointed directly at me. Fear paralyzed me. My mind screamed to move, but my body wouldn't listen. The caretaker's grin widened, showing jagged, broken teeth. Then, with a sickening scrape, he dragged the object he carried forward. It was a rusted shovel. At first, I almost laughed, relief flooding in. But that relief twisted into dread when I saw the shovel's blade. It was stained dark, not with rust, but with something fresher. The smell hit me next, a coppery tang that churned my stomach. He raised the shovel, tapping the ground with the flat edge in a slow rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. Each sound vibrated through the soil beneath me. Then, without warning, he lifted his lantern higher. The graves inside the small plot began to stir. The dirt shifted, rising and falling as though something underneath was clawing upward. I realized the caretaker wasn't here to chase me away. He was here to wake them. The ground trembled violently, cracking open at the foot of the graves. Skeletal fingers broke through the dirt, clawing toward the surface. A choked scream tore out of me as I stumbled backward, tripping over a headstone. One by one, figures began dragging themselves out of the soil. They weren't just bones. These corpses were half-rotted, their flesh sagging, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. They didn't look at the caretaker. They looked at me. The caretaker leaned on his shovel, watching with that grotesque grin. "The dead keep me company," he rasped. "And now, they'll keep you too." I scrambled toward the opposite side of the iron fence, clawing at the rusted gate latch. It wouldn't budge. My fingers slipped, raw and shaking, as the dead rose to their feet behind me. One reached out, its nails scraping my shoulder. I wrenched the gate open just as the corpse lunged at me. I stumbled out, slamming it shut behind me, but the thing's hand scraped through the bars, nearly catching my arm. My lungs burned as I ran back into the fog. The dragging sound started again, closer, faster. I didn't dare look back, but I knew he was following. The graves around me shifted, dirt rising and falling like waves. The whole cemetery felt alive, breathing, waiting for me to fall. Finally, I saw the faint outline of the caretaker's hut ahead. The building was small, old, and abandoned, or so I thought. In my desperation, I threw the door open and rushed inside. The air was thick with rot. The walls were covered with faded photographs, faces of people I didn't recognize, but each one had a black mark scratched over their eyes. And in the center of the room sat a chair. On it, a skeleton slumped forward, still dressed in a caretaker's uniform. I staggered back, staring at the skeleton in disbelief. If the real caretaker had been dead for decades, then who, or what, was chasing me outside? Before I could move, the dragging sound returned, echoing right outside the hut. The door creaked slowly, lantern light spilling through the cracks. Panicked, I ducked behind the chair, covering my mouth to silence my breathing. The door opened, and the figure entered. His lantern swayed, illuminating the skeleton slumped just feet from me. The caretaker stopped. His head turned unnaturally, slowly, until the hollow pits of his eyes stared directly where I was hiding. His grin stretched wider, impossibly wide, splitting his face. "You found him," he rasped. "Now, you'll join him." The skeleton in the chair shifted, bones creaking, its jaw opening with a dry crack as if to scream. I bolted out of the hut, screaming as I crashed into the foggy night. My feet barely touched the ground as I sprinted, blind with terror. The caretaker's rasping laughter followed me, echoing across the cemetery. The fog parted just enough to reveal the front gates. Relief surged through me. I was almost out. But as I neared, I saw something that froze me in place. Dozens of figures stood at the gate. Some were skeletal, others half-rotten, but all were silent, waiting. Their eyes glowed faintly, fixed on me. Behind me, the caretaker's lantern glow grew brighter, his voice whispering like the wind itself. "No one leaves." I was trapped, dead ahead, death behind. My only option was to climb the fence. I leapt, fingers scraping the iron spikes, pulling myself upward as the corpses began to move. Their hands clawed at my legs, tearing at my clothes. I don't know how I managed it, but I threw myself over the top of the fence, landing hard on the other side. Pain shot through my ankle, but I didn't stop. I ran into the street, away from the cemetery, not daring to look back. When I finally collapsed near a row of houses, people rushed out, asking if I was all right. I tried to explain, but the words wouldn't come out. All I could do was point back toward the cemetery. But when they looked, the fog had lifted. The grounds were silent. No lantern glow, no caretaker, no shambling corpses, just stillness. I quit the job the next day, refusing to ever set foot there again. Yet sometimes, when I drive past that cemetery at night, I see it, the faint flicker of a lantern moving slowly among the graves. And I know the caretaker is still there. My name is Marcus, and I grew up in a small town where the cemetery was older than the streets themselves. Generations of families were buried there, and every kid grew up hearing the same legend. At midnight, the cemetery bell tolls on its own, even though it hasn't worked in over 100 years. I never believed it. The bell tower had long since collapsed, leaving only the rusted frame of what once hung there. Birds nested in its broken beams, and no one in town had ever seen it ring. But one summer night, I found myself wandering past the cemetery after a late shift. The air was unusually still, and the moonlight painted the headstones in silver. As I passed the broken bell tower, I froze. The sound was faint at first, a hollow metallic clang echoing across the graves. My stomach tightened. The sound grew louder, as if the bell was tolling from somewhere deep underground. I checked my watch. Midnight. Exactly. The ground beneath my feet began to tremble, and a sickly, hollow vibration traveled up through my legs. That's when I realized the sound wasn't just in my ears. It was inside me. The vibration deepened, rattling the nearby gravestones. I stumbled back, staring at the tower's jagged silhouette. There was no bell to ring, no clapper to swing, yet the sound grew clearer, low, resonant, pulling me toward it like an invisible hand. Then, all at once, the graves around me shifted. I watched in disbelief as the earth trembled, dust rising into the cold night air. A headstone toppled over with a dull thud. I wanted to run, but something held me in place. My body felt locked, like the tolling was rooting me to the ground. Each clang echoed directly in my chest, shaking my ribs. Suddenly, I wasn't alone. Out of the mist, a figure appeared, an old man in a caretaker's uniform, thin and hunched. His face was pale, his eyes dark pits that glistened in the moonlight. He pointed toward the graves as the bell tolled again. His lips moved, and though his voice was a whisper, it cut through the night as if he spoke directly into my ear. The bell calls them back. I shook my head, whispering, "This can't be real." But the caretaker only tilted his head, his expression unreadable. The ground split open at the base of the oldest graves. Dirt shifted and cracked, and skeletal fingers pushed through the soil. My stomach twisted as I watched shapes claw their way out. Rotting bodies in faded burial clothes, faces eaten away by time. The bell tolled again, louder now, a sound that seemed to rattle the stars themselves. The corpses rose with the vibration, like puppets on strings, their eyes dull but fixed on me. The caretaker leaned closer. "They hear the bell. They obey the bell. And you," his whisper rasped against my ear, "you were not meant to hear it." I stumbled back, my breath ragged. The corpses staggered forward in unison, their movements jerky, unnatural, as if dragged by the sound. Their hollow moans blended with the metallic clang of the unseen bell, a chorus of the dead. I turned and ran, my footsteps crunching over broken stone. But the sound of the bell followed, each toll pulling me deeper into the cemetery instead of out. I tried to fight it, to force myself toward the gates. But my legs betrayed me. Each toll of the bell pulled me sideways, guiding me into the heart of the cemetery where the fog thickened. The corpses followed, shuffling through the mist with broken limbs, jaws opening and closing as if trying to form words. Their eyes glowed faintly, and the closer they got, the louder the bell became. I stumbled into a circular clearing where a single, massive gravestone stood. The name etched on it had eroded away, leaving only jagged lines across its surface. The caretaker appeared at the edge of the circle, lantern glowing dimly. "You've been chosen," he whispered. His voice echoed like the bell inside my chest, inside my skull. The bell does not ring without reason. I screamed at him to stop, but he only raised his lantern higher. The corpses surrounded the clearing, their bodies swaying in rhythm with the tolling. Then, beneath the earth, something larger began to move. The earth cracked open beneath the massive gravestone, soil spilling outward like a wound splitting open. From the fissure came a sound so low it felt like my bones would shatter. A skeletal hand, huge, not human, grasped the edge of the pit. Then another. Slowly, a figure pulled itself out. A towering corpse, draped in tattered burial cloth, its skull crowned with roots and moss. It had been buried deeper than any other, hidden away for centuries. The bell tolled again, and the creature's hollow sockets turned toward me. Its jaw opened, releasing a moan so deep it made the air shudder. The corpses fell silent, bowing toward it like worshippers. The caretaker dropped to one knee, raising his lantern. "The bellkeeper has awakened," he rasped. I stumbled back, shaking my head in denial. This was impossible. The creature stretched, towering over the graves, its shadow swallowing the clearing whole. And then, with a voice like breaking stone, it spoke. "The bell calls the living too." The words hit me like a physical blow. The bell tolled again, and this time, it wasn't just corpses that stirred. I heard voices, faint, terrified cries, echoing from the houses beyond the cemetery. Through the iron gates, I saw figures emerging from the town. Men, women, even children, all walking blankly toward the cemetery, their faces pale, eyes vacant. They weren't dead. They were alive, and they were being summoned. I screamed, waving my arms. "Stop, don't come any closer," but they didn't react. The bell's power had them completely. The massive corpse turned toward the approaching townsfolk, raising its skeletal arms. Its presence pulled them faster like moths to flame. The caretaker looked at me with his hollow eyes, his grin widening. "You heard the bell," he whispered. "Now you belong to it." The living townsfolk stepped through the gates, joining the circle around the gravestone. Their blank stares locked on me, and for the first time, I realized I wasn't just a witness. I was the sacrifice. I tried to run again, but the circle of corpses and townsfolk closed in, trapping me. The bellkeeper loomed above, its ribcage creaking as it inhaled deeply, as if drawing in the life around it. Then came the sound, different from before. The toll of the bell warped, twisting into a scream that pierced through my skull. I dropped to my knees, clutching my ears. But it didn't matter. The sound was inside me. Visions flooded my mind. Centuries of the bell ringing, pulling the dead from their graves, claiming the living one by one. Families torn apart, towns emptied, all swallowed into this endless ritual. The caretaker's whisper sliced through the visions. "You are its chosen. You will toll the bell when it sleeps again." I felt cold hands grasp my arms. Corpses pulled me toward the broken gravestone, their strength overwhelming. I fought, screaming, but their grip was like iron. The bell tolled again, and my screams were swallowed whole. They pinned me against the gravestone as the bellkeeper leaned close. Its skull loomed inches from my face, its hollow socket staring into me as if reading every thought I'd ever had. It lowered its bony hand, pressing a single finger against my chest. Pain exploded through my body. My vision went white, then black. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't lying on the ground anymore. I was inside the gravestone, trapped in the dark, my body heavy, unmoving. I tried to scream, but no sound came. My hands were stone. My skin was earth. Through the cracks, I saw the bellkeeper retreat into the soil, its body sinking back into the ground. The caretaker raised his lantern and whispered, "Sleep until the bell calls again." The world faded, and the last thing I felt was the toll of the bell reverberating in my chest, binding me to it forever. I don't remember how long I was trapped in the dark. Time dissolved. My body didn't move, but my mind never stopped screaming. Eventually, light broke through the cracks again. I saw faces peering down. New faces, people I didn't know. The cemetery looked different, newer, as though decades had passed. Children played among the graves, while parents called out to them. The bell tower was gone, only a faint outline of stone left where it once stood. But still, I felt it. The vibration deep inside my chest, dormant but waiting. The children ran past my gravestone, their laughter echoing. And for a moment, I felt a sickening hunger rise inside me, a need to hear the bell toll once more. I realized then, I wasn't free. I was part of the cycle now. And when the bell called again, I wouldn't be the victim. I would be the keeper. That was years ago. I've never escaped. Every midnight, I feel the bell stir deep in my bones, its vibration creeping into my veins. Sometimes, I hear footsteps above my grave. Curious wanderers, night guards, drunk kids daring each other to step inside. And I know that soon, when the bell tolls again, I'll rise. I'll carry the lantern, just like the last caretaker. I'll point to the graves, summon the dead, and lead the living into the circle. The bell doesn't stop. It doesn't forgive. It only chooses. And if you ever find yourself walking past a silent cemetery at midnight, and you hear the faint toll of a bell that shouldn't exist, don't stop. Don't listen. Don't let it in. Because once you hear it, the bell is already inside you, and it never lets go. My name is Daniel, and I used to spend my summers hiking deep into the Appalachians. I loved the quiet, the way the trees swallowed the world, leaving only the sound of the wind. But last year, I stumbled on something I wish I had never seen. It was late evening, the sun sinking behind the ridges, when I realized I had strayed too far off the trail. I wasn't lost exactly, but the forest looked unfamiliar. Then I spotted it. A small cabin tucked between the trees, half hidden in the shadows. At first, I felt relief. Maybe someone lived there. Maybe they could point me back to the trail. But as I got closer, that relief died. The cabin looked abandoned, roof sagging, windows broken, door hanging off its hinges. And yet, faint smoke curled from the stone chimney. I froze. Who would light a fire in a place like this? Something about the cabin felt wrong. The air was colder here, unnaturally still, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. That's when I noticed it. A figure standing in the doorway. Tall, motionless. Just a shadow against the dim light inside. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't even shift in the dim firelight. My first instinct was to call out, but the words stuck in my throat. Something about the way it stood there, unnatural, stiff, almost like it wasn't a person at all, froze me in place. I told myself I was just tired, that the shadows were playing tricks on me. Still, I took a cautious step back. The old porch creaked as the figure shifted ever so slightly, like it was aware of me now. Suddenly, a rush of cold air swept through the trees, stronger than any breeze I'd felt all night. The cabin door creaked open wider, revealing nothing but darkness behind the figure. That's when I saw it. Two faint, glowing points, like embers, hovering where its eyes should have been. I stumbled backward, heart racing. My instinct screamed at me to run, but the forest was already swallowing the light. If I bolted blindly, I'd get lost. And somehow, I knew. Whatever was in that cabin wanted me to run. I forced myself to step back slowly, never breaking eye contact with that thing. My boots crunched on the dirt and leaves as I whispered to myself, "It's just my imagination. It's nothing." But then I heard it. A sound coming from inside the cabin. Not footsteps, not movement. Something else. A low, rasping hum, almost like a lullaby. Except it wasn't soothing. It was broken, warped, like someone singing through a throat full of water. The figure swayed gently to the rhythm of the sound, its head tilting unnaturally to one side. The glowing eyes never blinked. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and ran. Branches whipped my arms, my flashlight beams shaking as I crashed through the trees. Every time I dared to glance back, I thought I saw movement in the corner of my vision. Something dark weaving between the trunks, keeping pace with me. By the time I stopped, panting, I realized I had no idea where I was. The trail was gone, and the forest was so quiet. Too quiet. Then, behind me, the humming started again. My chest burned as I pressed myself against a tree, trying to steady my breathing. The humming grew louder, echoing unnaturally, like it was coming from every direction at once. I swung my flashlight wildly, but the beam revealed only endless trees and drifting mist. Then, in the distance, I saw a faint orange glow. My heart leapt. Firelight. Maybe a campsite, maybe other hikers. I stumbled toward it, desperate for human presence. But the closer I got, the more wrong it felt. The glow wasn't flickering like a campfire. It pulsed steadily, like a heartbeat. And then I realized where it was coming from. Another cabin, identical to the first. Broken roof, sagging porch, door cracked open. Except this one shouldn't have been here. I had been running in the opposite direction. There was no way I circled back. The glow came from inside. My light cut across the porch, and I saw the same tall figure standing in the doorway. Still, waiting. The humming stopped. And in the silence, I heard the unmistakable creak of footsteps on the porch coming toward me. I turned and bolted again, my body screaming in panic. The sound of footsteps followed, heavy and deliberate, matching my pace no matter how fast I ran. My flashlight flickered, sputtered, and then went dark, leaving me in complete blackness. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I let my instincts guide me, stumbling through the undergrowth, tripping over roots, scraping my arms on bark. Finally, when my legs nearly gave out, I crashed into a clearing. Moonlight spilled down, pale and cold. My relief lasted all of 3 seconds, until I saw them. Cabins. Not one, not two, a dozen, maybe more, all identical, arranged in a rough circle around the clearing, each one sagging, broken, but all of them glowing faintly from within. And in every doorway stood the same figure, tall, motionless, eyes glowing like embers. The humming began again, but now it wasn't one voice. It was dozens, layered over one another in a haunting, discordant chorus. My mind screamed that this wasn't real, that I must be hallucinating. But the cold seeping into my bones told me otherwise. I clutched my chest, trying to convince myself this was some nightmare I'd wake up from. But the sound, the chorus of humming, was so physical, so heavy, I felt it vibrating in my ribs. One by one, the figures stepped forward. Their movements were slow, deliberate, as though they were performing some ritual. I stumbled backward into the center of the clearing, spinning to keep them all in sight. My mind screamed for me to run, but there was nowhere to go. Then, the cabins themselves seemed to shift. Their broken shapes bent, walls cracking and twisting as though alive. The pulsing orange glow intensified, flooding the clearing in unnatural light. Shadows warped across the ground, stretching like hands toward me. One of the figures raised its arm. The humming stopped instantly. The silence was worse. And then they all spoke together, their voices layered, hollow, and ancient. "You found us. Now you belong." My body went numb. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I thought I saw myself reflected in their glowing eyes. Not as I was, but as something else. Something hollow. I clutched my chest, trying to convince myself this was some nightmare I'd wake up from. But the sound, the chorus of humming, was so physical, so heavy, I felt it vibrating in my ribs. One by one, the figures stepped forward. Their movements were slow, deliberate, as though they were performing some ritual. I stumbled backward into the center of the clearing, spinning to keep them all in sight. My mind screamed for me to run, but there was nowhere to go. Then, the cabins themselves seemed to shift. Their broken shapes bent, walls cracking and twisting as though alive. The pulsing orange glow intensified, flooding the clearing in unnatural light. Shadows warped across the ground, stretching like hands toward me. One of the figures raised its arm. The humming stopped instantly. The silence was worse. And then they all spoke together, their voices layered, hollow, and ancient. "You found us. Now you belong." My body went numb. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I thought I saw myself reflected in their glowing eyes. Not as I was, but as something else. Something hollow. I collapsed to my knees, covering my ears, but their voices weren't coming from outside. They were inside my head, pressing into my thoughts, twisting them. "You belong. You belong." The clearing began to shift. The trees bent inward, closing like ribs around me. The cabins creaked and groaned, their broken roofs collapsing, their walls breathing as though alive. The figures drew closer, their glowing eyes burning brighter. I tried to scream, but my throat locked. My body wouldn't move. Every instinct screamed at me to fight, to run, but it was as though invisible chains held me down. Then something cold brushed the back of my neck. I turned my head slowly, and one of them was standing right behind me. Close enough that I could see the torn fabric of its coat, the pale, rotting skin beneath. Its hand reached out, skeletal fingers brushing against my arm. My skin burned where it touched me, and the world tilted sideways. Everything went black. Weeks passed, and I tried to convince myself my mind was unraveling. Maybe exhaustion, maybe stress. But the burn on my arm never faded. It grew darker, spreading like veins beneath my skin. One night, unable to take it anymore, I researched the area. What I found chilled me. Over a century ago, a settlement had been built deep in those woods, a logging town with a dozen cabins at its center. But one winter, every single resident vanished. Their bodies were never found. Local folklore claimed the townsfolk had been claimed by the woods, their souls trapped, their homes cursed to appear to travelers who wandered too far. The final line made my blood run cold. Those who see the cabins never truly leave. The settlers will come for them in time. That night, I dreamed again of the circle of cabins. But this time, I wasn't outside. I was inside one of them, staring out through the doorway, waiting for someone to stumble into the clearing. Now, months later, I don't hike anymore. I don't go near the forest. But the truth is, it doesn't matter, because the cabins don't need me to return. They come to me. At first, it was in reflections, glass, mirrors, even puddles. A flash of a sagging roof, glowing eyes behind me. Then it was the sound, that damned lullaby, seeping into my ears at night, vibrating through my bones. And last night, I woke up to the smell of smoke again. Except this time it wasn't faint. My entire room was thick with it. And when I sat up, heart pounding, I saw them. Through the window, the forest clearing, the cabins, the circle, and in every doorway, a figure, swaying gently, eyes burning. One of them raised its arm, and I felt the burn on mine ignite, like fire crawling under my skin. I don't think I'll be here much longer. I think I'm already theirs. My name is Thomas, and when I was 22, I took a job as a night guard at a small-town cemetery. Most people thought I was crazy. Who in their right mind would choose to spend their nights walking between headstones, surrounded by the dead? For me, it was easy money. Sit in the guard shack, make a few rounds every hour, lock the gates at midnight. The cemetery was old, but quiet. Nothing ever happened. Or at least, that's what I thought. The caretaker before me, old Mr. Duncan, had lasted barely 3 months before quitting. I remembered his last words before he left. "The dead don't stay buried here." Be careful after midnight, I laughed it off as superstition. But on my very first week, something strange happened. At 12:15 a.m., long after the town had gone silent, I heard the sound of footsteps crunching gravel. Not one pair, many. I stepped out of the shack, flashlight in hand, and froze. The sound was coming from everywhere, from between the graves, from beneath the ground. The dead were walking. At first, I thought maybe kids had snuck in, pulling some cruel prank. But as I tightened my grip on the flashlight, I noticed the movement. The figures weren't walking normally. They staggered, dragged their feet, and moved with a jerky, unnatural rhythm. One of them turned. Its face was pale, sunken, and its mouth hung open as if mid-scream. My blood ran cold. These weren't kids. They weren't even alive. I backed toward the shack, fumbling for my radio. Static, no signal, no sound. Just the growing shuffle of dozens of steps. Then I heard something else, a low groaning, deep and hollow, rising up from the earth itself. The ground beneath my boots shifted. The soil around certain graves began to crack, and then I saw it clearly. Skeletal fingers clawing their way through the dirt. I wanted to run, but my legs locked. For the first time in my life, I truly understood fear. I bolted toward the gates. My flashlight beam swung wildly, cutting through fog and headstones, revealing faces, rotted, broken, eyeless. Some still wore tatters of burial clothes. Others had nothing but yellowed bones and grinning skulls. They moved toward me as if pulled by some invisible thread. No screams, no howls, just silence broken by dragging footsteps and the crunch of earth. When I reached the gates, my stomach sank. They were chained shut. I rattled them furiously, praying they'd give way, but the lock held firm. I turned, heart pounding, and realized they had circled me. Dozens of them. They weren't fast, but they didn't need to be. A tall figure stepped forward. Unlike the rest, he looked almost human. His face pale, sharp features intact, dressed in a tattered black suit. His lips curled into something that might have been a smile. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped. My knees nearly gave out. These things could speak. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. The man tilted his head, studying me like a predator sizing up prey. "This ground is cursed," he whispered, his voice carrying in the night air. "Every soul buried here belongs to me." The crowd of corpses groaned in unison, as if echoing his claim. My skin prickled with dread. "Why me?" I stammered. He smiled wider. "Because you heard us." The flashlight flickered, then went out, plunging me into near darkness. Only the silver light of the moon remained, casting ghastly shadows across twisted faces. The suited man raised a bony hand, and the dead began moving again, their heads snapping toward me. I backed against the iron gates, praying they'd disappear, that I'd wake up in the shack with coffee in my hand. But this was no dream. The nearest corpse opened its mouth and screamed. The scream wasn't human. It was like 100 voices tearing through one throat. It made my ears ring, my chest tighten, and my stomach churn. I dropped to my knees, clutching my head, begging for it to stop. And just like that, silence. When I looked up, the suited man was crouching in front of me, his face inches from mine. His eyes glowed faintly red. "You could join us," he murmured. "One cut, one burial, and you'll never be alone again." I shoved him back instinctively, but my hands passed through him like smoke. He laughed, low and hollow, as though my fear entertained him. The corpses were closer now, some crawling, some dragging broken legs, their mouths opening and closing without sound. I couldn't breathe. The air itself felt thick, heavy, suffocating. There was only one thought in my head. I had to survive until dawn. I scrambled to my feet and ran back toward the shack. The dead followed, but strangely, they didn't chase me with speed. They herded me, as if pushing me exactly where they wanted. When I reached the shack, the door was wide open. My radio lay on the desk, but its lights flickered, dead. The phone line was ripped from the wall. But something else caught my eye. A small leather-bound book resting neatly in the middle of the desk. It hadn't been there before. I opened it, flipping through brittle pages filled with Latin verses and strange symbols. One phrase repeated over and over. Custos viventium, custos mortuorum. My Latin was poor, but I caught enough. Keeper of the living, keeper of the dead. And then it hit me. This wasn't just a guard job. This was a ritual. I was the replacement. The air grew colder. My breath came out in white puffs as the walls of the shack creaked and groaned. Shadows lengthened unnaturally across the floor. I grabbed the book, clutching it like a lifeline, when suddenly a voice hissed behind me. "Read it." I spun around, no one there. The suited man appeared in the doorway, his form shimmering between solid and smoke. His smile widened, revealing rows of jagged teeth. "You think you're guarding the dead," he said. "But really, you're guarding the living. From us." My stomach dropped. This wasn't a job. It was a curse passed from one poor soul to the next. I looked at the book again. My hands trembled as I traced the words. If I read them aloud, maybe I could survive. Or maybe I'd be sealing my own grave. Either way, I had no choice. I began reading. The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but the moment I spoke them, the dead froze. Their heads snapped toward me, empty sockets glowing faintly. The suited man snarled, his form flickering like fire in the wind. "You don't know what you're saying," he hissed. But I kept reading, louder, stronger, even as my throat burned. The ground trembled. Graves split open wider. The dead clawed at their ears as if the words were knives. The suited man lunged forward, his hand wrapping around my throat. His grip was ice cold, suffocating. But I forced the last words from my mouth. Light erupted from the book, blinding, burning. And just like that, silence. The corpses crumbled into dust. The fog lifted. The cemetery was still again. But the suited man was gone. I collapsed on the shack floor, gasping for air. The silence was deafening, but I knew it wasn't over. The book still pulsed with faint light, its pages turning on their own until they stopped at the last passage. It read, "One must always remain. The dead are never gone. The keeper must watch until another takes his place." My heart sank. I understood now why Mr. Duncan quit, why he looked half dead himself. The curse wasn't broken. The dead weren't gone. I had only forced them back temporarily. And now, I was bound. The sun began to rise, spilling gold across the cemetery. But instead of relief, I felt chains tightening around my soul. This wasn't a job. It was a life sentence. It's been 3 years since that night. I never quit. I can't quit. Every midnight, I hear them again. The shuffling, the whispers, the claws scraping from beneath the dirt. And every midnight, I open the book and read. If I falter, even once, the dead will rise. They'll spill from this cursed ground and walk into town, dragging everyone they find back with them. So I sit here, night after night, guarding the living from the dead. But I can feel it wearing me down. My reflection looks less human each day, paler, thinner, my eyes darker. I don't know how much longer I'll last. And when I finally can't read the words anymore, when I collapse from exhaustion, who will take my place? Because one thing's certain, the graveyard shift never ends.